You're 57 years old, you've got 2 million saved, and you're sitting there wondering, is this actually enough to walk away right now? Not in 5 years, not when you hit 62, today. That's exactly the question we're going to answer in this video. I'm going to walk you through this exact situation, a 57-year-old with 2 million, and show you the specific steps, the specific challenges, and whether retiring today is actually possible. If you want to see what this looks like with your own numbers, there's a link in the description to book a call with my team and me. Let's get into it. Steve and Lisa are married and want to retire now. Steve is 57, and for Steve's life expectancy, he chose 80 because he has some health issues and men in his family simply don't live that long, so he wanted to use 80 for his life expectancy. Lisa is also 57, but for her life expectancy, we're going to use 90 because she has a little bit of longevity in her family, and that's what she chose to use. We're also going to assume that Steve takes his Social Security at 70, and I'll explain why later. And at 70, he'd get $42,000 a year. Lisa's going to take her Social Security at 62, and it's $20,000 per year. And of course, we have to assume an inflation rate. Steve and Lisa wanted to err on the side of being conservative, so they're going to use 4% for the inflation rate. So that essentially means that they're going to need 4% more per year in income to maintain the same lifestyle that they desire. In addition to that, they need $10,000 per month in total income. And they have, as we had mentioned earlier, $2 million. $1.2 million is invested in an IRA. $400,000 is in a Roth IRA, and $400,000 is in a non-qualified account. And it's important to know too that they're going to need health insurance to get them to 65 when Medicare kicks in. The four main things that Steve and Lisa want to know is, do they have enough to retire? When should they take Social Security, which we already decided, but I'll get into the why. What tax minimization strategies should they consider? And how do they minimize health insurance costs after they retire, but before Medicare kicks in at age 65? The first thing we need to determine is if they have enough. To determine this, I plugged the following data into our retirement planning software and ran a Monte Carlo analysis. A Monte Carlo analysis essentially gives us a probability of whether they will have enough to retire on based on running several potential different outcomes based on a variety of different market factors. You can see from this Monte Carlo, they only have a 3% chance of success. But before you feel bad for Steve and Lisa, there's something that I think is important to know that can have a significant impact on this outcome. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, people tend to spend less as they age. And in my 30 years working in this business, I would definitely agree with the Bureau of Labor Statistics findings. When my clients are 80, they generally are not spending as much as they did when they were in their 60s. Additionally, the National Bureau of Economics found that older retirees are more financially content than younger retirees. So this would imply that people are not spending less because they don't have the money. They are spending less because they simply are not as active as they were in their younger years. So now let's assume Steve and Lisa decided to adjust their Monte Carlo analysis by using a 2% inflation rate instead of a 4% inflation rate, with the theory being as they age, they won't spend as much in their later years, therefore they don't fully have to adjust for inflation. As you can see, this one simple change is a game changer as it moves their success rate from only 3% to 99%. This literally is the difference between retiring immediately versus having to work multiple additional years. Now, if you're watching this and you're thinking, I want to see what this means for my specific situation, that's exactly the conversation we have every day. There's a link in the description where you can book a call with us. We'll look at your numbers together and show you what early retirement actually looks like for you. No pressure, just clarity. Before discussing Social Security strategy, tax minimization, and health insurance strategies, you will need to understand a few key concepts so that we can build the foundation so that you can understand the strategies that we're going to be going over. So for starters, and as a reminder what we said earlier, Steve and Lisa have their $2 million invested and $1.2 million within the IRA, which we call the tax deferred bucket, $400,000 in the Roth IRA, which we call the tax-free bucket, and $400,000 invested into what we call the non-qualified bucket. Of course, with the IRA, when they take money out of that IRA, 100%, generally 100% of what they withdraw is subject to taxable ordinary income tax. They also have to be very aware of the fact that if they withdraw money from the IRA for unqualified reasons, whatever they take out will also be subject to a 10% penalty tax if they take it out before 59 and a half. They also have, of course, the $400,000 invested in the Roth IRA. They can, of course, take the contributions out at any time without any penalty tax or any tax. And they can also take out all of the earnings for qualified reasons post 59 and a half without any ordinary income tax. Finally, we've got the non-qualified bucket, which when you withdraw basis from that non-qualified bucket, that comes out tax-free. But if you own stocks in the non-qualified bucket that have appreciated in value, the gains of the stocks would be subject to capital gains tax. And we'll again be going over this in more detail later. Another thing that's very important to know is that because Steve and Lisa are retiring at 57, they're going to need health insurance to get them from 57 to age 65 when Medicare kicks in. And if they're like a lot of people, they'll look at COBRA, which is a temporary solution, and it can be very expensive. For some people, it can make sense for a short period of time. But in this example, we're going to assume that they're just going to get their health insurance from the Affordable Care Act insurance, also known as ACA insurance. And depending on the state you reside in, it might be called a different name. For example, if you live in Minnesota, they have a different version of ACA insurance. It's called MNsure insurance. So depending on the state that you reside in, it might not be called ACA insurance, but the general principles that I'm going to be going over are applicable regardless of if you're on ACA insurance or you're on a state-sponsored version of ACA insurance. And to illustrate how this works, I'm just going to use an example from the county I live in, Eau Claire County. And so depending on the county you live in, you might have higher premiums than what I'm going over or lower premiums than what I'm going over, but the general essence of the concept will remain the same regardless. So in Eau Claire County, if we have a married couple, both 62 years old, and they're on a pretty typical silver plan, if their modified adjusted gross income is $21,150, their premium is only going to be $444 for the entire year. But if their modified adjusted gross income rises to $84,600, the cost of their premium on an annual basis jumps quite a bit by close to $8,000. Now it's over $8,400 per year in premium that they would owe at that modified adjusted gross income level. But what I want you to pay particular attention to is watch what happens when it goes from $84,600 of modified adjusted gross income and it increases by literally only $1 to $84,601 of modified adjusted gross income. This is called the cliff. Once you go over that cliff by $1, your premium increases greatly. And in this example, by close to $32,000 a year. So at the end of the day, we want to do anything that we can to prevent people from going over the cliff because of the substantial loss that you would have in paying for Affordable Care Act premiums or state-sponsored version of Affordable Care Act premiums. And so what this doesn't mean is it doesn't mean that you have to live on $84,601. You can live on $200,000 a year, $300,000, $400,000 a year. And if most of the income that you have coming in doesn't count as modified adjusted gross income, you can still have very favorable Affordable Care Act premiums. Let's take a look at what is included towards modified adjusted gross income. Things like wages, salary, pay, Social Security income is included, pension income is included, distributions from that tax-deferred bucket like IRA distributions are included in modified adjusted gross income. If you have a business, the net business income is included. Municipal bonds, which generally pay income tax-free interest, that interest is included towards this calculation. And of course, if you have a non-qualified account and you have income or dividends or capital gains within that non-qualified account, those are all included towards modified adjusted gross income. But what is more important than what is included is what is excluded. Qualified Roth IRA distributions, none of that is included towards modified adjusted gross income. And applicable distributions from that non-qualified bucket of basis, that also is not included towards modified adjusted gross income. So at the end of the day, we want to make sure that those buckets, those investment buckets, are organized correctly going into retirement so that you don't go over the cliff and have to pay those excessive premiums for Affordable Care Act insurance or a state-sponsored version of Affordable Care Act insurance. Now that you understand the buckets and how ACA insurance works, let's get into some recommendations and explain the rationale behind these recommendations. In our example, we have Lisa taking her Social Security at 62 and Steve taking his Social Security at age 70, and there's 3 main reasons why I think this makes sense. Steve is the breadwinner with a larger amount of Social Security benefits, and he has the lower life expectancy. His large delayed amount will continue to Lisa until she dies at age 90 in this example. The second reason I believe this makes sense includes by taking Lisa's Social Security at 62, they will get benefits for quite a few years until Steve presumably passes away at age 80. Now, if we thought Steve was going to live to 90, this would not be the ideal strategy, but in this situation, in my opinion, it makes sense. Finally, by taking only one person's Social Security prior to 65, this alleviates the extra modified adjusted gross income created by Social Security, which helps to reduce unnecessary ACA health insurance costs prior to Medicare kicking in at age 65. Next, let's shift gears to tax minimization strategies. In Steve and Lisa's situation, it would make sense to consider getting the bulk of their income from their non-qualified bucket for a few reasons. But before going over these reasons, it's important to know that when they're liquidating large amounts from their non-qualified bucket, some of the money will likely be tax-free, and a portion will likely be taxable. We will have to make sure that the taxable portion doesn't exceed what would push their modified adjusted gross income over the cliff, which would cause excessive ACA costs. With that said, the reasons I believe taking non-qualified money first for the bulk of their income shortfall includes the following reasons. First, we want to keep modified adjusted gross income low until Medicare kicks in at 65 to prevent them from going over the cliff and thereby blowing up their Affordable Care Act costs. And presumably a large portion of their non-qualified account would be a return of basis, which would be tax-free. The second reason this makes sense can be attributed to the pre-59.5 early withdrawal penalties from their IRA. We simply don't have this problem with their non-qualified investments, as no early withdrawal penalty typically applies to the non-qualified bucket. Finally, liquidating the non-qualified bucket is preferable to liquidating the Roth IRA because having a bucket of money growing tax-free beats the non-qualified bucket where you have to pay taxes on dividends and capital gains and interest income. We want to keep that tax-free bucket around as long as we can to avoid those taxes in the later years. A few considerations Steve and Lisa should consider in lieu of this strategy includes investing the non-qualified bucket conservatively due to the strain from withdrawing large amounts of money out of this bucket in a short amount of time. Since most of this bucket will be withdrawn within 5 years, it simply won't have ample time to recover a downturn in the market if it is invested into stocks. For this reason, I would advise Steve and Lisa to invest this bucket more conservatively. Once they turn 59.5, they could alter their distribution strategy to include taking a portion of their income needs from their IRA because they will no longer have the early distribution penalty from their IRA. They likely will still need to take money from their non-qualified bucket while being very attentive to not pushing their modified adjusted gross income past the cliff. If their non-qualified bucket gets depleted, they can repeat this process by supplementing their income with Roth IRA proceeds until 65 when they no longer have to worry about going over the cliff for ACA purposes. Due to this recommendation, I would consider having them invest their IRA for income and the Roth IRA for growth for a few reasons. The higher demand for income from the IRA will require a more conservative approach. Additionally, since the Roth IRA will be utilized more sparingly in retirement, it has time on its side, which will enable the Roth IRA to have more time to recover from a downturn in the market. Furthermore, it is beneficial to grow the tax-free bucket of money more while limiting growth on the tax-deferred bucket, which will be fully subject to taxation upon withdrawal. One thing worth mentioning is the relevance of Roth conversions for Steve and Lisa. I understand this is a very hot topic, and in many circumstances, it makes sense for people to consider. Unfortunately, in this scenario, Roth conversions do not make sense in my opinion, because they will likely spend all of their non-qualified assets before 65. From that point forward, they will still need large amounts from their accounts, which can come from a combination of their IRA money and their Roth IRA money. The majority of the income need at this point could come from their IRA, while only taking Roth IRA funds if needed to keep them in the 12% tax bracket. In this situation, Steve and Lisa will not have much room left in the 12% tax bracket for Roth conversions, so they will likely push themselves into the 22% tax bracket if they decide to do a Roth conversion. This 10% jump from the 12% tax bracket to the 22% tax bracket makes a Roth conversion less appealing in their situation. If they had plenty of room left in the 12% tax bracket before getting pushed in the 22% tax bracket, a Roth conversion strategy would be more appealing, but this just simply isn't the case for Steve and Lisa. So there you have it. Whether retiring at 57 with $2 million works comes down to a few key decisions made in the right order. Get those right and the math works. Get them wrong, and even $2 million isn't enough. Now, one of the biggest decisions inside an early retirement plan is when you claim Social Security, because the gap between retiring at 57 and claiming at 62, 67, or 70 changes everything. I show you exactly what life looks like on both sides of that decision in this video right here. I'll see you there.